Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique Johnson-Lindsay, and I want to welcome you to the Active Listener podcast by Lightspeed. As a lifelong learner and the daughter of a Navy veteran who became an elementary school teacher, education and service are in my DNA. This foundation, paired with my love of technology, led me to these conversations with remarkable minds shaping the K-12 landscape. Join us as we amplify these vital voices and explore how active listening remains foundational to educational excellence. Whether you're an educator, administrator, or someone passionate about the future of education, there's something here for you to learn. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Active Listener Podcast. Super excited. I know you hear me say that every episode, but I'm super excited to be here. I have a special guest with me, Tiffany Jordan. I'm going to let Tiffany introduce herself, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background. She is known as a champion for equity. Her journey began in the classroom with Teach for America. She is currently working at the intersection of education, justice, and community. Today, we're going to have a conversation that dives into teacher recruitment and retention. We're going to talk about listening to teachers because I think that is so important, and just real world experiences that shape the classroom and community. So first, Tiffany, welcome to the Active Listener Podcast.
Thank you, Dominique. What an amazing podcast, focusing on education and giving teachers a voice. So I just really appreciate the invitation and so excited to be here today.
Perfect. So I'm going to jump right in because I got a lot of questions. I hope I can get to them all, but I'd love to start off with just the basics. So what really drew you into wanting to have a career that was rooted in like education and service?
And that's actually a really funny question and a great question. People have always asked me since I joined Teach for America right out of undergrad, like, did you always want to be a teacher? And the answer to that is no, actually. Never thought I would really be in education, to be honest with you. Didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I always knew I wanted to help people. And so I didn't know if that was going into law school, right? I didn't know if that was going into medicine. I just really knew I wanted to help people. What ended up happening, and it's funny because my daddy used to ask me when I was a little girl, like, you think you want to be a teacher when you grow up? And I was like, no, I don't, right? And so that's what makes it so funny because my first job out of undergrad was being a teacher. I did a program called Teach for America, where they put the top college graduates into the most challenging schools in the nation for 2 years. You have a 2-year commitment and you just really try to change the trajectory of a underperforming school. I was really drawn to that because my high school in Roanoke, Virginia, my beloved high school, I'm a huge advocate of my high school. It is a predominantly Black high school and sometimes doesn't always get the best reputation, right? The most resources, things like that. And I wanted to help other first generation college students from low income backgrounds realize that I'm not the exception to the rule. Right now I am. But how do we make it so that we have more young people from lower income levels and neighborhoods like mine have access to college if that's what they want to do, right? And so that was really how I got into education and service. I had no idea that the rest of my life, I believe, is going to be in serving people in whatever capacity that is. As you said, when I first came on, I have a lot of different intersections that I kind of work in. But that is what initially drew me to Teach for America.
So let's dive into Teach for America a little bit more because I know it's such a big program. It's pretty well known. But one thing that is always unique to me is what takeaway do people have from the program? Because I think for every person is different. You know, some people do Teach for America and then they still go on to do like a law career or whatever. So how do you feel like your experience with Teach for America kind of shaped like the rest of your career trajectory, as well as like how you see students in like schools and communities?
So when I left my Teach for America career, I went into policy, right? And systems change work. And I always tell people that your lived experience, anybody's lived experience, whether you've been a teacher, right? Whether, you grew up in certain neighborhoods, whether you grew up different cultures, right? However you identify, those different experiences are needed when it comes to shaping policy. And so, like you said, a lot of people in Teach for America, we all do different, be 35 years this year that Teach for America has existed, right? for me, and people go into different sectors. They go into medicine, they go into law, they go into policy, right? They stay in the classroom. But I would say my lived experience as a teacher, right, is what really shaped when I went into policy, right? One of the things that was so shocking to me and confusing to me, but then it made sense to me a little bit later on, is that when I got into the White House as an intern for the Obama administration and the education policy team, I was the only person on the team who had ever been a teacher before. It was full of people who had PhDs and who had been to law school, but nobody who had that real tangible experience of being a teacher, right? Because we all know that being a teacher is very different in theory than it is in practice. Same thing on Capitol Hill, right? There are not enough teachers who are making policy, and even in our state legislatures, right? There's not enough people who are at the table who have that lived experience as a teacher making these policies, right? But because I had been in the classroom, because I had taught ninth grade, but I had kids who were reading on a third grade reading level, I knew very much so, that it looked very tangible. The way I have to teach this classroom, which is 40 kids, right, in a Title I school, which is already, unacceptable, that I had kids who were reading at their second year college level, and I had kids who were reading at the third grade reading level, right? And you have to figure out how you're going to move the spectrum, not just for that kid who is high performing, right? But also for that child who is lower performing as well, right? And that you don't want to miss that young person who is high achieving, right? You still want to challenge them as well, and you have to prepare them for college. So, and then the other part of it is, where did your students sleep at that night, right? The night before. What did they have to do before they came to school? Why are they tired, right? I guess the easiest thing is to think that they were up all night playing video games, but sometimes is, did they have a safe place to stay that night? Or do they have a medical issue, right? So there's so many things that teachers and educators kind of deal with. So I was like, okay, let's bring all of those experiences really into the rest of the work that I did, including when I was doing a lot of work with recruitment, trying to find teachers who, have closer experiences, right, to some of the kids that we served who sometimes don't get that opportunity to have teachers who have similar experiences to them.
You segue perfectly into that because you're talking about this background, and I feel like everything that you had done up until that point led to this very unique recruiting experience. And I think recruitment is very interesting when you think about it. We all have a job to go to, and the way that we often get to this role is through a recruiter. So their emphasis on like how they impact the position is so unique because it kind of determines whether you're interested in the position, whether you want to stay in that position, like all of these different things. And so just hearing about this background that you had already leads to all the questions I have about the recruitment experience because currently I feel like there's such a recruitment crisis for teachers. And I feel like we've been on the brink of that for quite some time. I think about it that, teaching often still feels like such a thankless profession, despite the fact that it's so important. And so just knowing that you are the person that's literally bringing people to this profession, it's like, girl, you gotta have something in you. You gotta have some charisma. You gotta have something in you. So let's just
Right.
start at the beginning of that. Talk to me about what was your strategy coming into a recruitment position, and like how did you even start the process of being able to reach out to people?
I had never really thought of myself as like a official role as a recruiter. Now, that's not to say that I had been recruiting. I always say like I'm almost like an ambassador for Teach for America because when I see a young person who is sharp, right, I'm like, heard of Teach for America, right? Because we need leaders, right, like that in the classroom. I honestly was up on the hill and I was reading an article about a study called the Chetty Study, right? And a lot of people in Charlotte, where I currently live at, know about this Chetty Study. This Chetty Study said that if you are born poor in Charlotte, North Carolina, you're more likely to stay poor your entire life than any other place in the country. That was Charlotte ranked number 50 out of 50 when that study came out in 2016, 2017. But my hometown of Roanoke, Virginia, was about number 38 or 39, right? So I was on the Hill and it really impacted me, right? I mean, I had worked my whole life to get to DC and to work on the Hill. And then I got there and kind of missed that interconnectedness with community. What ended up happening is that I had a mentor of mine call me one day, say, "Hey, Tiffany, we are looking for a recruitment and retention coordinator for Roanoke City Public Schools. And it's going to focus primarily on recruiting teachers and leaders of color. And I think you'd be perfect for it." Now, Dominique, I got to tell you, right? I am one of those people who I have a reputation for saying the things that are on my mind, especially when I see that something is wrong, right? And so, and the system that I was going into wasn't really encouraging that. So I originally was like, no, I'm not interested, right? I'm just not interested. I know how I am. And I don't know if y'all are really serious. They were like, no, 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 we're serious. I said, okay. Honestly, Dominique, what changed my heart was I had to think about my own experience as a student in Roanoke City Public Schools. And I thought to myself, you know what? Young people in my hometown, they deserve this. And so I said, okay, I'll take it. Right. How did I go about it originally? It was honestly just kind of learning the landscape, right? I wanted to know where are the gaps that we have in our school systems. And the first one was that we have Roanoke City was a minority school division, predominantly Black. And at the time that I joined in that position, we only had 2% of our teachers who were Black. I started by like really looking at the landscape, right? Really looking at who my allies were to take to particularly HBCUs, right? Historically Black colleges and universities in Virginia, right? We were recruiting at places like Virginia Tech and Radford and all of those places. And those places were wonderful, right? They produce great teachers. But so does Virginia State, right? University. And so does Norfolk State University, right? And we need to make a habit of not just going to recruitment fairs, but building really strong relationships with the professors at these schools, right? With the deans of education at these schools to know that if you send your graduate, right, that you have invested so much time in for 4+ years, that there is going to be culture set up for them, that they are going to be supported, that we do want them there, and we're going to make sure that they're successful here.
I love it. And one thing that's standing out to me is just the idea of almost innovation. Like we don't think about innovation in social settings as much as we do like technology and stuff like that, but it is innovative to just do something that you're not already doing. What do you think when it comes to recruiting educators? What do people often misunderstand about the role?
Mm. Oh my God, Dominique, let me tell you. I'm so glad that people talked to me about teaching in a more negative way before I became a teacher. Because one of the things that I first got, especially when I first graduated from college, I graduated from Wake Forest. It's a pretty prestigious school, right? So people were like, you could go to any law school you want to. You could go to, this. And they didn't realize how prestigious of a program Teach for America is. But more importantly, people did not respect the craft of teaching, right? It is a craft, it is a gift, it is something that is not easy for you to do. If you think that you can be a teacher, if you think it's easy, I will challenge anybody to go in there with 40 ninth graders who are just getting out of middle school, right? Or even better yet, for 20 seniors who are about to graduate from high school, right? And you have to hold on to their attention, right? It is a hard thing to do, right? To teach content, right? That may not be exciting, to find a way to teach it, to have classroom management, right? To have not just buy-in from your students, but investment from your students that they will turn in their homework, that they will try to study for a test, right? And for investment and trust from their parents and their family members as well. And in communities. I think that's the misconception that people have. And it shows and it's reflected in the pay, right, of teachers. It is not nearly enough. There are cities now that are building essentially affordable housing for teachers, right? Because they cannot afford to live in some of the cities that they teach in. I think the other misconception is that teachers can be like babysitters, right? That after you've done it for a while, you don't get nervous on the first day of school. When you have a passion, right? And that you realize that you have such a responsibility, that you are really teaching the next generation of, doctors, lawyers, post office workers, right? Like, your nieces and nephews, your children, right? To read, to write, to comprehend, right? To have basic critical thinking skills. It is a true responsibility, right? To do. And if you decide to be a teacher, right? When really it's a shortage, right? It's hard to do, and you probably can go off and do anything else, right? And you choose to be a teacher, right? That person is a gem, right? And we should really be cultivating that person and encouraging them and thanking them, right? That's why on Teacher Appreciation Day, I try my best to send things to my friends who are teachers, right? I remember one of the things that I needed the most when you're a teacher. Yeah, I haven't taught in about 10 years, right? But when you're a teacher, printer paper, it is like gold to you. The thing. So send a teacher that you know, send them a box of paper, right? So they can print things off. Send them some pencils for their classroom. Send them some markers, right? They are doing the best that they can to supply for their classroom with very limited resources, right? I would say that is the misconception. I don't think that teachers get enough respect and love for choosing to educate this next generation.
Agreed, agreed. And it brings the next question up because we know that a lot of teachers are leaving the profession. And I know you said like, oh, I haven't done this I haven't been a teacher in a while. And of course, I know you're no longer in your recruitment role, but from your experience, two sides, I guess, what helped teachers stay and what do you feel like made them leave?
I would say almost every person who I know who's left the classroom or left education, they say it wasn't the students. They love the students. They say it was kind of the adults, the municipalities, right? All the things you have to do to jump through just to be a teacher. It's really hard to navigate when you just want to teach, right? Another part of that is that you need some support, right? You do need some support when you have discipline issues in your class, right? You absolutely need support when you're a new teacher, right? You want to seem like you have it all together because you don't want to seem like you are keeping your head above water, even though you're keeping your head above water. So you absolutely need that support. Being a teacher is a hard job. It is the best job I ever had, but it's also the hardest job that I've ever had, right? Because you really are. Some of those kids spend more time with you as a teacher than they do at home, right? With their own parents. So I would say that's the thing that I hear the most why people leave. Now I hear a lot more like discipline issues. I was super blessed. I had very minimum classroom management issues, but I know a lot of people who did, right? And not just Teach for America teachers, teachers in general, people who have been there 20, 30 years had classroom management issues, right? So I hear a lot of that. The thing that keeps people coming back, though, and I know teachers who have taught for 20, 30, 40 years, right? One of them who I had the pleasure of teaching with, Suzanne Newsom, when she retired from teaching, she went back, right, to do something in schools. And I think she's the person who used to tell me every day, no matter if I've been teaching 30 years, every year on the first day of school, I'm still nervous, right? Because it is a responsibility, for you to teach effectively. You know what's at stake if you don't. But I would say what brings people back is the love for young people. Is your love for seeing kids get it. I still have kids. I call them kids, but now my kids who I taught when they were in ninth grade, 13, 14 years old. Now they're 26, 27 years old, right? But sometimes they still text me if they see something that, reminded them of something they learned in my world history class, right? Or in my genocide and human nature class. They will still text me and say, Miss Jordan, like I saw this and I thought of you, right? They want to share their good news with you, right? And then the other part is that when you do see them grow up They join the military, they go to college, you get to go to their college graduations, they have family, they get married, they invite you to their weddings, right? So I would say just your love for teaching and educating and young people is what tends to bring people back.
I believe that, and that definitely is my experience. I have great relationships with other teachers. My mom is a teacher, so
Yeah.
oh my goodness, to see their kids are now in her class. It's just a full circle
Yep.
moment. It's always like, oh my God, this person was in my mom's first or second class, and now they have a kid or they have a niece or like all these things. It does bring these like feel good moments. I
Yeah.
do think though with someone with your background and just seeing kind of the full scale. So I feel like seeing things from the Capitol Hill side of things all the way to actually being in classrooms and working at a school district is what do you think is like one or two actionable things that schools or school systems can do right now to just better support and retain educators knowing everything that we know? Because again, I don't want to say, oh, just funding. I mean, it's funding is a stretch for everybody.
Other than funding, what we try to do in Run City is create spaces, right, for our teachers. Because what we found out is that teachers felt like they were kind of in silos and they wanted to be in connection with one another. Sometimes that meant like on a Saturday, everybody going out to dinner or after school doing something. Or that meant what I hoped and I was trying to roll out something when I left for another role with Run City is resources for people who are moving into the area, right? And it just shows that you care about the teachers who are coming into your space. And it's not something that they have to go and look up something on some ethernet, somewhere they have to go look up resources. You create spaces for people, right? Because when people feel connected to a city, when they feel connected to a community, to their school, right? They tend to stay. But the other part, honestly, Dominique, is making sure that it's the right fit. One of the things that I asked for our school system to change when I was working in recruitment and retention was that when I first got there, they had people from central office recruiting for schools instead of the principals. I found that really odd, right? Because your principal is like the head of the household, right? They know what type of students they have, right? They know the needs of their students. They know like the demographic makeup of their students. Let this principal who does this all the time, let them choose who is best for their school. So I think it's really about giving them some agency. Let teachers go on school visits, right? Let them go tour a couple of schools and say, you know what, I like this school, right? Interview with principals, and then they can choose one another. I would say give them more like autonomy and agency to the school leaders, right? Principals, as well as the teachers, I think goes a long way. Because you may think that it's all funding, but you may find that it may be something else that may attract and retain teachers that you may not have had, before. But you don't know that unless you ask, right?
I love this, and this is such a light speed moment because with what we do with the instructional audio, one of the biggest points that we've been driving home as we kind of entered this like space of just like we have like more integrations with like safety and all of this different stuff is teacher agency and teacher autonomy. It's so high
Yeah.
up on the list that teachers need to feel safe. They need to
Mhm.
feel like if something happens in my classroom. And so it's so interesting to have this conversation where we're just talking about teachers as a role, but knowing what we do on the tech side as far as like we're trying to actively help push this ideal forward that we have to listen more and more to teachers.
Thank you all for doing that on your side, is listening to teachers and empowering them. I just want to say that kudos to you guys for doing that for sure.
Thank you. The last question I want to ask you before I let you kind of get out of here and we get to my fun question is just talking about kind of the culmination of all this, your work, spanning over education, policy, community, housing now. Think about the future. what do you see for the future of you? And then tell me, what do you see for the future of education? What are you like excited about?
In my life, I think about everything is around what I talked about when I first came on, right? Is helping people. And to drill a little bit further down into that, it's about poverty alleviation, right? And connecting people to needed resources. I'm a natural educator, right? Like anywhere I go, even when I am in communities, teaching people about different community programs and programs to get their property taxes, frozen for seniors and things like that. I'm teaching, right? I'm really passionate about housing. I find myself these days in a urban planning space, but it all comes from my lived experiences, right? Because I had students when I was teaching who were displaced, right? Who were McKinney-Vento students, who were homeless, that needed stable housing. We know that when people in general have a roof over their head, have a meal, feel safe, they tend to perform better, right? On their job, at school, in life. But you never know. If we stabilize this family, we give this child or these children, this family, a safe place to live, get them into a school that is performing well, you never know what that child or those children will do to change the trajectory of a family, right? For generations. What do I see as the future of education? I'll be honest with you, Dominique. I don't know, right? I see it's a lot of changes with, AI, right? And with all of with so much technology, teachers are leaving the classroom, right? I said we had a teacher shortage when I was teaching in 2012. You said it earlier, and I agree with you. We got a crisis now, right? I would say one of the things though, and this is putting my recruiter hat back on, is I wish programs like Teach for America or like teaching fellowships or, even school districts, I wish they had a better job using their teachers as ambassadors to inspire people to come back to teaching. And then the other part of that is that we are going to need some more funding for teachers, right, in education. You can't expect for people to do this really hard job. Even though I love teaching, it was a really hard job. You can't expect for people to do that without getting paid a livable wage. But to be honest with you, what keeps me going is Teach for America's mission statement, right? I have it tattooed. I have a tattoo that says one day, right? Because Teach for America's mission statement is one day all children in this nation will have access to an excellent education, right? And that's what pushes me, right, on my really, really hard days is that I have to believe that we can get this education. Just like teachers have to differentiate in classrooms, we have to differentiate what it looks like to both recruit and retain really quality teachers and educators.
Agreed. Agreed. I love it. So with that, I'm going to our lightning round so I can ask you
Okay.
two questions. So the first question is, if you could remove one barrier in education, what would it be?
If I could change one thing, it would be for different states to look at their licensure kind of requirements and the barriers that some people have in getting licensure.
I think that's a good one because, to your point, so much shifts and changes. And if people are passionate about education and they can cover all the other bases, like they have formal schooling, they have
Mhm.
clean backgrounds, I think more people think it is worth considering inviting them into the school environment and just getting them some more like trainings. I get it. My final question, super easy. What is your favorite sound?
Ooh, my favorite sound. That is funny. I'm gonna say like a church choir, like a full one,
Please.
90s, like a 90s one with robes. They march in the whole kits and caboodles. I'm talking about the whole thing. The second one I would say is probably the Golden Girls theme song because that is my show.
Love it. Well, I do want to say, first of all, I enjoyed this conversation. And I think it was such an important conversation to have. And I always like to hear from people that have had these broad experiences because they bring just so much richness to like our conversation and to our audience. So thank you. I really appreciate you coming. And I want to say, anytime you have anything to talk about as it relates to the future of education, we would love to have you back. And yeah,
Well, thank you, Dominique. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. It's such a needed topic.
That's all for today's active listener. Thanks for tuning in. Share your comments on this episode on our Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn social media pages. You can visit our website at lightspeed-tech.com to learn more about our mission to ensure every student hears every word. And subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Until next time, let your listening be as active as your learning.